Alright, time for another draftphysics.com video presentation. So, a review video of sorts. Yesterday's video was pretty good in terms of generalizing the argument and showing that there's more than one proof that kinetic energy just doesn't work as a theory, that it doesn't pass the coherent with the experimental evidence test. The evidence doesn't prove it. The evidence doesn't show it. And it's only, in some narrow circumstance where you ignore the rules of physics, which is you got to pay attention to the details, where they can contrive an experiment here or there to make it work. Now, in some of those contrivances, I've shown, for example, Professor Lewin overtly cheating the experiment. I mean, he's claiming something weighs twice as much, and there's no way that's a believable or plausible theory. Okay, so he's making a claim, doing an experiment, and he's doing it for show, to prove the book correct. Okay, not because he's doing real science anymore. He's just trying to prove a book correct. So he's trying to demonstrate it working, even when it doesn't work. And it's still fraud. I mean, it's still fake. It's still phony. Whatever his educational purposes are, it's just really bad science. Cheating, just, plainly a cheat. Steroids at the Olympics or something. Somehow people still think it's ethical. Do whatever you have to do to win. They still feel okay taking their medals. There's men, competing against women and feeling proud of themselves. Pretty ridiculous, frankly. But anyway, so people are obviously capable of deluding themselves into thinking all kinds of crap about what they're doing and why they're doing it. Why they would cut all these corners. And so the other experiment is this 200-year-old drop round things into clay and make claims about how much clay they displace, and you can sort of understand that the shape of the object's probably going to make a difference, because you're going to be pushing clay differently. If it's a flat surface, it's going to push all the clay down. If it's a round surface, it's going to push clay in different directions, and it's going to cause more displacement than it would have if it had to do the long way. If it had to push it down and then push it sideways, that's more work than pushing it diagonally. Anyway, so, the evidence is just so bad. So in this recent video, I provide a rather... I fell upon another argument it's frankly more decisive than the lever argument. And so I thought I would just rephrase it a little better. So I have to just get rid of this. I think I've accomplished that task. I think this will be close enough. Alright, so, you can just make a really simple device like a lever. You can just make a pressurized vessel, and we can just make it so, it has more than one possibility to it. So it has 3 cylinders, and all the cylinders are equal. So these are pistons in, this cylinder, and you're just going to compress the air. And the simple truth is, that the kinetic energy formula, it's a little glary again. I don't know why that's happening. Alright, seems a bit better. So the simple point is that you're going to say the velocity of these objects is going to dictate, their energy. 1/2 mv squared. And obviously I'm saying the Newtonian, Galilean, and Tardian theory that worked all the time was just mv equals energy. And so these are clearly competing theories in the sense that they're obviously different theories of the reality. And you're just saying, well, which one really is the truth? And the truth is revealed in something as simple as this experiment. Because by their formula, I can create free energy. So if I put this in at a 5 velocity, and I push from this side at a 5 velocity, I'll end up with a 10 velocity here. Okay, that's just, you know, a fact. And it's going to mean that I'm going to have twice the energy here because of this squared term. So I'm just going to sit there and put in, say, 50 joules of energy to do this and 50 joules to do this. And I'm going to end up with 200 joules of energy here by their definition. So they're going to say that I can make free energy. And likewise, the opposite happens in the sense that I can push this one with this 10 velocity. I'll produce the 5 and the 5, and I'll somehow lose half the energy. Just it'll disappear because there really won't be an explanation for where it went. And so it's a pretty decisive proof that the theory just can't work. This cannot be true, because it can't pass a test this simple. This mechanism works very well to convert one action into a different action. So you could even add a third or fourth or fifth cylinder, and you're just really talking about space being compressed. So I could convert this into an air gun. Okay, so I never thought of it, but yes, an air gun is probably the better example, where I can shoot a bullet. Okay, because what I'm really doing is creating a small mass cylinder, a lighter cylinder. And I can go lighter and lighter and lighter, and I can get higher and higher velocities, okay, because I've made the cylinder, the amount of mass I'm allowing to be ejected by the high air pressure, and I can keep increasing this velocity, and I won't be getting equal and opposite reactions. I'll get, you know, again, 1 joule of energy here and 500 joules of energy coming out here. That can't happen, okay, by your own accepted rules. It's not equal and opposite in any way. And it clearly doesn't make much sense. I mean, yes, you have 500 times less mass to move here, okay, than you have here. And that's the only difference. It's the mass difference. And so, you know, these examples prove the case. It's about mass and velocity. And lots of instruments, levers and pressurized vessels, all they can do, they can't do anything. They can't create energy. They can't destroy energy. All they can do is change the ratio between the mass and the velocity. You can change. You can take a big mass and move it slow, or you can take a small mass and move it fast with the same energy. And this works. It worked for Newton. He predicted lots of stuff, explained lots of stuff using this. It works. And there's no reason to say, let's just throw that away for this fable, okay, that has a terrible history in the sense it wasn't argued with any evidence. Nobody's ever done the let's drive 60 miles an hour and let's drive 30 miles an hour and let's prove it takes 4 times more fuel to go 60. No one's done it. Okay, in 300 years they haven't hooked up horses, they haven't, you know, pulled wagons with pigs, they haven't pulled wagons with humans, they haven't done it with anything, gasoline, oil, anything. No experimental evidence demonstrating something so dramatic, 4 times the amount of energy to go 60 miles an hour than 30. It's a dramatic statement. It should come with a pretty dramatic proof, and it has none. No proof, no evidence. I mean, I really shouldn't have to repeat these arguments to intelligent people. They should all be a little distressed that these basic fundamental experiments haven't been done, and that these basic fundamental experiments demonstrate it doesn't work. I mean, even one of the most vocal defenders, I don't know if it's vocal is the right word, antics, buffoonery defenders, his own experiment demonstrates it, you know, where he shoots 2 objects with a lever on a spring, and clearly the the lighter object leaves, you know, the same energy produces, frankly, extra, okay, more energy. And it can't be true, because if it were true, we'd all just use levers to create free energy, and we wouldn't bother paying oil companies and all the rest of that garbage. So it's, you know, what is there to argue except your belligerent, inquisitional style denial of facts. You just don't want to hear that the earth is round. Well, I guess you don't want to hear that the sun isn't the center, I mean the earth isn't the center of the universe. You don't want to hear the facts. Still, I mean, 300 years later, you're still behaving just like the closed-minded morons of the past who couldn't accept any change in their understanding of reality. Who cares what the facts say? And that's pretty bad on you. I mean, yeah, makes you shitty people. All right, so I guess I'll play some clips from the video and leave it at that. It was a pretty good video, frankly, and you know, yeah, that's all I can say. It won't be appreciated. It won't be given any of the nothing stated in it will be appropriately responded to by anyone, and that's unfortunate. That's your style of representing and defending science, is to pretend you made an argument when you didn't. Even could be argued, at least that you could always say how many gallons of it did you have, how much of it was there. And okay, so I'm making an argument about the fact that, so this all relates to the idea of quantum mechanics and whether you really believe in this understanding that there's a certain volume of energy in the universe, whether you think of it as a volume of wave pressure or you think of it as a volume of discrete particles moving. There's energy in the universe, okay, and there's a certain amount of it, and it's migrating, it's moving from place to place, and that seems a pretty logical way to understand how it works. Now, yes, quantum mechanics has now invented the idea that you can somehow push energy into the fourth dimension or into some other dimension, and it'll pop back in some other location. So they have created a... But even the people who believe they can make matter disappear or energy disappear and reappear, they can see that there's a fixed amount of it. Wherever it gets pushed out of this dimension, it ends up popping back, and appropriately and instantaneously. And so, yes, I'm just making this simple argument. This is all there is to follow. There's just this energy in the raw form, as Faraday would, Faraday did lectures on this stuff and sort of just pointed out that there's, these two kinds of force. There's the force where I push on something, or I push on a rope, or pull on a rope, or do this some other thing, and I can make something move. And then there's all the invisible forces, the forces that seem spooky action, where I put a charged object next to a piece of paper and I make the paper move. So there's no ropes, there's no strings, there's no something connecting it, but there's still a force. And I think modern people can understand that, yes, but it's still inside the object. The force travels through it. Whether I pull on a string or I send electricity through the wire, I am sending the force through the wire, because the force is going to move the atoms inside the substance. So, it's all an invisible force and an amount of it, a volume of it. And it's quantizable. It's quantum mechanics. You can give it a value, a quantity, number. 2x the total energy here, which just doesn't make any sense. So I'm just making this pressure argument. I can just move the pressure from one vessel to another vessel. I make free energy moving it one way. I lose half the energy moving it the other way. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't happen in reality. It's not a loss of energy. It's the same ability to do work. And I really shouldn't have to keep making these arguments. So I use the three demonstrations: levers, pressure, and then the space argument, which is pretty simple, that NASA keeps saying, well, we just use Newtonian mechanics. And by that, they literally mean Newtonian, okay? They don't need Leibniz's 1/2 mv squared. It doesn't really work. It doesn't work is the simple point. They can't, they still have to move mass at a velocity to navigate in space. And it's just mass at a velocity. There's no, I can make more of it, I can make less of it by using different masses. No. I can only use the momentum. And they won't say the word momentum. And that's part of the disappointing aspect of this, is that NASA knows the truth and they don't tell it. Okay, making somebody else richer, okay, giving them some of you. So this is a simple argument about the whole inertia thing, friction. You just have to understand that there's not even a Newton's third law, in the sense that, yes, in the case of an explosion, you can understand why there's a third law, because the explosion goes this way, the explosion goes that way. Little bits fly off in both directions equally, and so you have every expectation that you're going to have the same amount of bits flying that way as you're going to have that way. The same amount of energy. If I make the bits bigger on this side, then they'll move slower. But I'll still get half the energy this way and half the energy that way. And the other example is I encounter something and there is no explosion. There's just my energy. I'm hitting them. And what's going to happen is part of my energy, or all of my energy, is going to be transferred to them. And that's just as simple as making an economics argument. Again, if I give away my money, there's not some opposite force that takes it from me. Giving it away makes me poorer. I get poorer automatically by giving my money away. I don't need another force to take the money from me. There's no counter force. There's no counter action. There's just the action of me giving it away. So if I'm walking and there's friction, I'm giving the energy away. There's no counter force taking it from me. I mean, it's a pretty simple, and I would argue better defended description of the reality. Mechanics. I mean, they're two good concepts. Mechanics, is sort of just saying that, yes, this is mechanical. You have to interact in the 3 dimensions that exist in the physical space. You interact with some other thing, okay, whether it's a force or whether it's an object. And the fact is that you have to do the math. You have to do the figure out how much of their force is going this way versus how much of your force is going that way. And that simple math will tell you where you're going to go. You just distribute the amount of energy over the volume of the mass, and it'll tell you how fast it's going to be capable of going. You can follow it, okay? You can trace every little bit of it in a sense. You can at least. So, and part of the mechanics part is understanding the mechanical limitation that, I can't bang into something at 30 miles an hour and let's say it weighs 1/10 of what I weigh. It won't leave at 300 miles an hour. It can't convert the money. So if I have bills, $10,000 bills, I can't hand a $10,000 bill to some object and it's able to distribute it across all of its mass. It can't. It can only distribute it when it's in smaller pieces, in pennies or nickels or dimes. And so that's a fact of the mechanics, is there are a few rules. There's not many, but there's a few rules that you have to follow in terms of converting your energy into their energy. This model where it goes, how the action moves through a system, and then the quantum. So it's a nice idea, quantum mechanics, but that's not really what you're doing anymore. You've broken the mechanical part by creating false rules and laws that don't exist. And in a sense, those fake rules are breaking the quantized part, because now you're creating energy. You can't do that. It's of energy. It doesn't make any sense. It can't be true. It couldn't possibly oscillate. It couldn't possibly work as a mechanical device. None of these things could be. You can't have a system that oscillates without moving in space. An oscillator. Like a lever or like a pendulum or like something else, and you have a little bit of imbalance in it, but the imbalance is circular, so it goes through cycles, and it will continue to oscillate with the same energy on both sides. It can never store more energy in gravity and then make less energy in gravity, and then the less energy produce more energy again. The energy always has to be in storage and then come out of storage. If you don't store the energy, you can't reuse the energy. That's pretty a simple rule, and you pay no attention. This really shouldn't be an argument. Yeah, there shouldn't be much contention. Yeah, I mean, again, this is almost like the two-slit argument. I mean, I have pointed out how so much of it was a deception. So much of it was, this idea of using infinitesimally small slits. It just ends up being a trick. The trick is I turn a double slit experiment into a single slit experiment. Now I no longer have to account for the two patterns. And clearly physics doesn't have an explanation for the two patterns. It doesn't tell you why there's two patterns. It doesn't tell you how the two patterns are mixed. It doesn't have any theory. Because they can't they can't make their story of photons splitting in two work to do it. Because they're not splitting in two. They're not doing what they're arguing is happening isn't happening. And I've demonstrated it, and again, it's just ignored. And this is why are you so belligerently attached to ideas that are so corrupt and poor as arguments? Why are you still flat earthers? Why are you forcing the Earth to be the center of the solar system? What is your passion for that? Why is that necessary? I have to ask the question. What is it that you're afraid of in changing these little things in physics? What do you think what towers that you're attached to will fall down? About the reality. Looks better that way. It's you have to conserve the energy. The energy is in stuff that, whether you think it's a clump or not, whether you actually... Okay, so yeah, I'm just trying to, I'm trying to give you the benefit of the doubt as much as I can in terms of saying, okay, go ahead and think in terms of waves or some other thing, but don't you understand the wave has a quantity to it, that it's a volume, that it's an amount. It's not any amount. It's a certain amount of movement in the universe, and it always has to be accounted for. But you wouldn't get that part either, just because your theory is sort of dependent on some idea that the wave travels through space and only lands in one location. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, so I can't even argue it. Because it doesn't make any sense that photons land by their own discretion. That they choose where to go. Technology getting better thing is taking some of that inefficiency out. Alright, so this is basically a heat argument that, another point in the history was the whole connection to Joule and the physics he did, and then this idea existed that heat was a necessary function of doing work. That the idea is that every time you did work, you had to produce heat, and heat was somehow a representation of the work you're doing. When that's sort of the wrong idea. Heat is just representing the work you're doing in the sense that it's more of the energy you're losing. It's always coming out of your energy if you're making heat. It has to come from somewhere, so it's not just a footprint. It's an actual loss of your energy. The footprint isn't for free. So yes, heat can be used to measure the amount of action, because there's a connection between how much you're going to lose to friction or how much you're going to lose to molecular movement that you don't want when you're doing work. But there's no law that says you can't do work perfectly efficiently, that you can't create a laser beam or some other perfect mechanism for the conversion of one energy into another energy, and that you can't take all the heat out. Of course you can. It's just difficult to do. It just requires precise engineering. But we've seen over time that we've made devices that are a lot more efficient than they used to be because we took the heat out. We took the waste out. Yeah, so that's the dilemma. I think none of these arguments have been challenged in any way. The space argument, that's about mass and velocity. There's no 1/2 mv squared involved. It's just about me throwing something out of the spaceship, a mass. Yeah, so, and I've sort of, that argument is another one that's just so visually obvious. I have a container of gas, and the molecules are hitting all the surfaces, and they're putting pressure on all the surfaces. And all I'm really going to do is I'm going to put a hole somewhere, okay? And the fact is that I can make a hose, but that's just really an extension of the surface. And so I'm just really saying that I'm really just going to look for anything going this way. If I make the hole this way, then the energy that would have hit the surface to compensate for the energy hitting the surface this way, I'm letting that energy go out. So I'm clearly creating extra action this way because I'm going to hit more surfaces inside the tank now. It's going to get hit this way. All right, not more surfaces, but more compared to this way. So I'm just changing the balance. I'm letting stuff going this way out of the tank, and I'm keeping stuff going this way in the tank. And the consequence of that is that the tank has to move this way. I'm obviously letting the stuff that would compensate or yin yang. I'm letting the yang out, and I'm stuck with the extra yin. It's so obvious. And it's so obvious that it's just about what's the energy quanta of the bits I'm letting out. How much energy did they represent as a bang against the surface? And that's all that's going to exist. There's not going to be any 1/2 mv squared. There's just going to be a mass and its velocity. Because that's what was hitting the surface, a mass and a velocity. Change. And it's a radical change. Again, it creates free energy. You can't get more radical than that. So why the radical change when there was no evidence that anything Newton, Descartes, or Galileo were saying was substantially wrong? So there was no evidence that they were substantially wrong, and yet we're going to make a radical change, okay, that breaks levers and breaks all kinds of things. And you're just, what's the motivation? Just to be anti-Newton, anti-establishment? This was some sort of goth thing. You just wanted to dye your hair and look sad. What is the purpose of this divergence? For what use? And you can sort of see that it sort of came down to, well, the Germans and French were feeling left out of science, and so they had to be counter just to make themselves somebody. And it might be that simplistically stupid. It's the same energy. It's the same. There's a great irony in the fact that the Chardonnay is the one most responsible for giving airtime to this propaganda for 1/2 mv squared, and she at the same time was an aggressive defender of Newton's mechanics. It's almost like, how could she translated his work, and it's supposed to be one of the best translations, at least the one into French. And it's almost ridiculous because it's such a core of Newton's physics that you're changing. It's not some little piece of his physics you're changing. It's a gigantic piece that you're challenging. And that's just that's so ironic. And to me, it just proves that I don't think she really knew what the hell she was talking about. Because you really can't, praise Newton and then so attack something so foundational to Newton's understanding of circumstances, bad motivations, bad ideology, and no scientific method at all. Yeah, so that's the other part of it. It's not like you're you're doing this aggressive defense of bullshit with any kind of integrity. You're really not providing evidence, and you really are just being obnoxious and arrogant and using whatever tricks you can use to degrade the other side. You really can't make a stand-up scientific argument, and you certainly are stuck in a position of defending a bunch of experiments like Eddington's experiment never repeated. The fact that the Young analysis, the two-wave analysis, doesn't get right answers in the two-slit experiment. You can just go through all these examples where your counter arguments are terrible. They'll talk about breaking distance when the evidence is breaking distance doesn't prove 1/2 mv squared because it comes up with the wrong answer too. I mean, it doesn't come up with the momentum argument, but that's only because they don't understand what friction is. And the fact is, the faster you're going, the less friction you're going to be able, the less able you are to give your energy away to friction. Yeah. So, I mean, this isn't about just making mistakes anymore. This is about people being aggressive defenders of bad science. Completely weak, unevidenced assertions. That's not an accident. That's on purpose. I mean, you're doing that, you're showing that you really are a science hater, not a science defender. To those facts that exist. Then that's all required is you being fair. Then you will concede that you got to tie this science up because it's got obvious error. Yeah, right. It's got obvious lack of evidence, and then the theoretical points that can be made about experiments you could conduct quite easily, some of them, demonstrate it. And you really can't get out of the demonstration. Again, Brozo did a video where he's, pushing a half-mass object with a lever, and he gets, almost very close to exactly what momentum would predict, which ends up being twice the energy and free energy. If you believe in your 1/2 mv squared, it's a free energy device. Yeah, you have to have explanations for that. You can't just run from those facts. You can't just ignore them. Code in it. It's more than incomplete. It's incomprehensibly broken. Right. So incomplete was the word Einstein would use for a theory he didn't think much of. And yeah, this is a lot less than incomplete. The experiments are lousy, in many cases convoluted, by extra variables that shouldn't exist in the experiment. Lots of ways to try to pretend you have some kind of evidence when you really don't. And again, the air track experiments of Professor Lewin is such an obvious example that this is being demonstrated to be a truth by chicanery. It's not an honest truth. It's just a presented truth. It's theater, where you can make anything true. All right. It's probably enough. Probably at the end enough. Go a little further. There's no point in going any further, but yeah. Until it grows into something, it's not very useful to... Yeah, there's just no point in having any kind of attempting conversation and debate because no one will show up and counter any of the arguments with actual arguments. They'll just throw insults. So, it is a sad time for the human race, frankly. In so many ways, there's just so much of their existence is now fake news and lies and horseshit. And it's the amount of integrity and trustworthiness and honesty in people is just couldn't be lower. And yuck. I didn't think the world would get this ugly, and it can get uglier. Idiocracy is on the march. Sad truth. And such. Yeah. Lament. So this has been a draftphysics.com, debatephysics.com also. But again, I can't even construct their counter argument. It's such mush. It isn't any better than, your hair is crooked. I mean, they don't have a counter argument. And such. So, till the next time. Yeah. Who knows when that'll be, because there's just not much point.